Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Las Terrazas del Pisque wash processed Ecuador from Kaffeelix. And there's the bag right there. And Kaffeelix, based out of St. Pölten, Austria. And this is their first ever appearance on this channel. This is their coffee roaster I had zero familiarity with going into this review. This is also our first ever review of any Austrian-based coffee roaster, and the first time I'd ever heard of them was while I was in discussions with Airworks about an upcoming coffee drop, and after that they were featured in Roastable's top 100 coffee roasters list, so that only added to my curiosity about this coffee roaster. So we will see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 40. And recipe we went with for this coffee was a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 95 degrees Celsius, about 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. The roasting machine that Kaffeelix uses is what's called a coffee tool, which is a coffee roaster that I'd never heard of before this review as well. Now, the roast profile for this one was kind of interesting, as it did turn out a slight bit more developed than I might have expected going into this review, as it was reminiscent of some of the Onyx coffees that I have had in the past, and even a slight bit more developed than some of the Sweet Bloom coffees that I've had a number of years ago, which is to say that it's reminiscent of a lot of those medium light American coffees, and even then it still had a slight bit of development to it in that regard. Hopefully that gives you a good idea. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 16, first impression, and we did opt for the V60 with, once again, the cup turning out a slight bit more developed than expected, as there's a heightened focus on the caramelized aspects of the cup, complemented by some citric qualities, but for the most part, it was just very caramel forward, which was fine with me. I think I might have expected this one to be maybe a little bit more traditional of an Ecuadorian coffee for a number of reasons. In a way, it reminded me of the Arnaud Casse that we had from Flower Child, which was kind of the epitome of what you might expect from a more traditional Ecuadorian coffee. As I feel like more recently, Ecuadorian coffees have kind of skewed away from this much more traditional profile. But this one right here, especially off this first impression, was offering a lot of those aspects. We move on to day 19 as we opted for the Chemex with a pretty similar second impression with a surprising focus on the caramelized aspects, and what I would describe as being a brown sugar aspect to it as well. A bit more of that traditional Ecuadorian profile with a complementary citric quality. So once again, just very traditional in that regard. We move on to day 22 as we opted for the April brewer, and there was a little better structure to the cup, as there's just better definition to it with the caramelized aspects and what I've described as being a honeyed bitterness as well. The cup as a whole feels a little better with more of a pronounced sweeter citric quality and some slight nuttiness to it. So again, offering a lot of those traditional aspects, but at the same time, something to kind of contrast that with a slight fruit profile. Day 25 through the V60 with Kaffeelix's recipe, and there was better structure to the cup today with a lot of the caramel and honey aspects present in a better defined sense once again. So I feel like this coffee as a whole was kind of structuring itself with a little bit more time, skewing a little bit away from the fruit characteristics though, as it's primarily focused on the citric tones, but outside of that I would say that any additional fruit aspects were much more muted on this day. Day 28 through the Chemex with Kaffeelix's recipe, and this is the first time the development can be felt a bit more, as there's much more of a smoky quality noticed this time around. The cup was mostly dominated by the caramelized aspects, but there was a lingering citric fresh fruit quality sweetness within the finish itself. An okay day all around, because the smokiness was kind of hindering the rest of the aspects within this one. Day 31, back through the V60 with Kaffeelix's recipe, and there was still some nice structure to the cup, but it does appear that the development was continuing to hinder it as more time has passed, with the most notable roasty qualities to the cup up to this point. Still a nice caramelized aspect with that lingering citrus, but it continues to be hindered by the developed qualities of it. Day 34 through the Chemex, and I'm not entirely sure where I came up with this recipe. I feel like it was a little bit of a hybrid from what we had worked on with Kaffeelix's recipe and what I felt like was the best direction to go with this one, which was at 95 Celsius at a 16.67, and this worked out pretty well, as it was definitely the best it had been to this point, with more of the robust qualities present at the forefront, including that slight roasted quality, but the caramelized aspect and the rest of the coffee just had slightly better definition to it, most notably the fruit qualities, including the orange, which was much more sweet and pronounced in the finish, lending itself towards a much better time this one. Day 37, one more try through the Chemex and the same recipe. It continues to offer consistency, especially with this adjustment, with nice definition and a highly pronounced traditional Ecuadorian aspect of chocolatiness, nuttiness, and caramel, complemented with those citric qualities. Slightly bitter honey yet again, with a slight lingering spiced aspect to the cup as well. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s, so we'll start with the body level 4. So I think that's also a much more traditional aspect of a South American coffee, as this one had an abundance of body to it right from the start, and it's something that you can feel a little bit more prominent within this one, especially relative to some of the coffees we've had in the past. And it was so interesting to me that it scored that level 4, especially given that it was made with the Chemex, and even then at a slightly diluted recipe at that 16.67. So that goes to show just how much body and texture there was within this one. Cleanliness, level 4. I've mentioned that there's a slight bit of a hindering development quality to it, but even then it's not enough to hinder the overall score on the clarity, as even then I would say that there's nice definition to the rest of the coffee, especially by the end of it. So level 4 definitely still felt like the best place to put it. Finish, level 4. And I did say towards the end there was a little bit more of that honeyed aspect to this one as well, which did give it just, I would say, a little bit additional of a quality, including that spiced and nuttiness. So there's plenty in the finish, lots of things to pick up in that regard. Sweetness, level 4. And the sweetness definitely skewed a lot more on that caramelized side of things, and I would say that that is probably one of the better aspects to it, because I do like that caramelized taste to it. Oftentimes it does go hand in hand with coffees that may have a little bit more development to them, and that seemed to be the case with this one, but even then I would say that it's scored as the most enjoyable quality for me. Citrus fruit, level 4, and I would say that there's a little bit of a fresh fruit sweetness to this one as well, as I kind of mentioned that orange quality to it, and that definitely skews on the citric side of things, and that is probably the second most enjoyable aspect of this coffee for me. Losing my voice on this one. Caramel, level 4. I've already mentioned that one briefly, but it's definitely the most pronounced aspect and most consistent aspect within this coffee for the entirety of it, as it's the first thing I picked up when trying this coffee, and it's one of the things that was an ever-present quality within it, and the most enjoyable aspect of it for me. And then we have a bunch of level 3s. We'll start with the acidity level 3. Not the brightest coffee. Did not expect it to be the brightest coffee, even without knowing the roast profile of this coffee roaster going into it, mostly because of just how traditional sounding this Ecuadorian coffee was. Florality, level 3. And while I could maybe allude to that honeyed sense being a little bit more of a floral sense, I would not necessarily say that that was the case. So even then, it's a little bit more muted at that level 3 mark. In fact, the spiced quality was an either equal or more abundant of a factor than this one, as that scored there at that level 3 mark. Berry fruit, level 3. I can say that there are some of those more, we'll say, dark berries, some slight grape qualities to this one as well, which once again is in line with the experiences I had from the Arnaud Casse, another much more traditional Ecuadorian coffee we've reviewed this year. The chocolate, level 3, and yeah, there's definitely a fair bit of the chocolate aspect within this one, as it continues to offer plenty of those traditional qualities. Bitterness, level 3. And that is coming in a, we'll say, citric sense as well. I think they have a pineapple note list on here, which once again, a little bit of an unripened pineapple makes a lot of sense to me. Savoriness, level 3, that's much more in line with the nutty qualities that were present within this one. And then I think the final thing worth discussing is the smokiness, level 2. I think it's somewhat been beaten to death at this point, how much that impacted this coffee overall. So I don't think we need to discuss it too much, but it definitely played a significant role in the overall impression of this coffee. But as I'm looking at the tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Interestingly enough, before I even got an opportunity to try this coffee, I did get some feedback from Airworks saying that this turned out a little bit more developed than I think that they had expected as well. So that did play, I would say, a very significant role in the overall experience of this coffee, as I think that this coffee roaster is maybe supposed to skew in a different direction, and I'm not entirely sure what happened with this one, given that I have no familiarity with this coffee roaster, but obviously it impacted the overall results of this coffee. And the best comparison I have is that Arnaud Casse, which is something that I keep going back to, mostly because I really enjoyed that one for the traditional aspects of it, but for the same reason I didn't enjoy this coffee as much, mostly because it offered those while at the same time still having that smoky quality to it, which did seem to take away from it. And even then I wouldn't necessarily say that there was as nice of a structure to the overall traditional qualities within this one relative to that Arnaud Casse. So this one wasn't necessarily my favorite, But that does transition into the type of person I would suggest this coffee to. If you do enjoy your much more traditional Ecuadorian coffees, as I mentioned once again, they've definitely gone away from that, offering a very wild array of different coffee profiles now, then this one's a pretty nice fit. Offers a lot of those things, chocolate, caramel, and the nuttiness to it right from the onset, while offering that complementary citric tone as well as that slightly darker fruit aspect to it. In addition to that, not the most amount of brightness either, so you're getting a lot of those qualities while at the same time still getting a much more, we'll just say, toned down version of maybe a little bit more modern of a approach to this coffee. I think that's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Las Terrazas Del Pisque wash processed Ecuador from Kaffeelix. Thank you for watching.